Maria Alfaro grew up in Anaheim, California. By 13, she was a drug addict, a prostitute at 14, a single mother at 15, and by 18, she was the mother of 4 children and a convicted murderer. At 20, she became the first woman in Orange County, California, to receive the death penalty. On June 15, 1990, 9-year-old Autumn Wallace was home alone after a short day at school, waiting for her mother and sister to return from work. Maria, who lived about 3 blocks away, knew the Wallace family well and was at one point particularly close to one of Autumn's older sisters, April. Maria and April went to high school together, and Maria would visit the Wallace home often, and while pregnant with her second child, she lived at their home for a short time. After 1989, April stopped being friends with Maria because she doubted her truthfulness. On this day, Maria was desperate for money to buy drugs. She planned to steal valuables to sell and choose the Wallace home because she believed no one would be there. To her surprise, Autumn answered the door after she knocked. Maria asked to use the bathroom and, familiar with the layout of the house, she grabbed a knife from the kitchen before heading to the back of the house. She lured Autumn into the bathroom, where she stabbed her over 50 times. Maria then ransacked and stole items from the Wallace home, which she later sold for $240. April tried calling Autumn at about 4:30 to let her know she'd be home late from work, but Autumn didn't answer the phone. April arrived home at 5:15, where she found the house in a state of disarray. The hall closet was open and things were scattered around. April called out for Autumn but received no answer. When April entered her bedroom, she noticed that her television and mirror were missing, and some clothing had been thrown around. April immediately left the residence and went across the street to a neighbor's home. At approximately 5:40 p.m., Linda Wallace arrived at the residence and was informed by April that the house had been burglarized and that Autumn was missing. Linda entered in search of Autumn and noticed that many items were missing. Unable to locate a telephone in the house, Linda instructed April to telephone the police from another location. While April ran to a neighbor's residence to make the call, Linda searched her home and discovered Autumn's body in the back bathroom. 3 neighbors recalled they each separately observed a reddish or goldish bronze Monte Carlo parked in the driveway of the Wallace residence and 2 Hispanic men standing nearby facing the street. One of the men was holding a child, approximately 18 months of age. The man with the infant subsequently was identified as Antonio Shorty Reynoso. Orange County Sheriff's Department investigator Tom Giffen testified that he arrived at the Wallace residence at approximately 7:20 p.m. on the night of the homicide. At approximately 11:15 p.m., Maria, her boyfriend Manuel Cueva, and their son Manny walked past the Wallace home. Maria asked Giffen for permission to speak with April, but Giffen declined. Giffen testified that while speaking to Maria, he recalled witness accounts that a small child had been seen in front of the house with 2 Hispanic men. The following day, after learning that a fingerprint lifted from the Wallace bathroom matched Maria's fingerprint, Giffen conducted an interview with her at the Sheriff's Department substation in Stanton. Maria denied any involvement in the crimes during this interview and was eventually released. Investigators were not able to obtain a warrant for Maria's arrest until late June, after Maria left a bag at the home of Maria Ruelas, where she and her boyfriend often stayed. The bag contained 2 pairs of shoes, one belonging to April Wallace. Maria was arrested the next day and interviewed again, during a videotaped session that lasted more than 4 hours. In the course of the interview, Maria confessed to murdering Autumn and burglarizing the Wallace residence, stating that on the day Autumn was murdered, she was staying at Manuel Cueva's father's home in Anaheim, 18 years old, the mother of 2 children, and pregnant with twins. Cueva was the father of her younger children. She was addicted to heroin and cocaine, and on the day of the murder she left Cueva's residence at approximately 11 a.m. to purchase drugs, taking Manny with her. Defendant was driven by an unidentified acquaintance to an area of Anaheim known as Little Tijuana, where defendant sought out a man named Juan, who was employed with her mother at Disneyland. Juan directed Maria to a nearby apartment, where some guy downstairs named Huero was rumored to be selling drugs. Maria left Manny with Juan at his apartment, while she and another woman named Sabrina left to buy drugs. purchasing 2 dime bags each of cocaine and heroin. Afterwards, Maria and Sabrina returned to Juan's apartment, proceeding to cook and inject the drugs until approximately 2 p.m. Her acquaintance, Antonio Reynoso, who had been released from prison the previous day, also visited Juan's apartment that afternoon. When she and Sabrina exhausted their supply of drugs, Reynoso offered to share his own drugs if she would share her rig, a term referring to the needle, syringe, and other paraphernalia used to inject drugs. After agreeing, she and Reynoso injected additional quantities of drugs while Sabrina looked after Manny. After consuming Reynoso's entire supply of drugs, she desired to continue taking drugs, but had run out of money. Maria, Reynoso, and a second man drove to the Wallace home. She told Reynoso that she formerly resided with the Wallaces and was willing to sell Reynoso a videocassette recorder that she had left at the residence. Maria admitted to the police that she knew Autumn would be home alone that afternoon because both Linda and April Wallace were at work. Upon arriving at the Wallace home, Maria told Reynoso to hold her baby son while she entered the residence. Maria admitted stabbing Autumn, initially telling the police that shortly after entering the house, she saw a knife on the ground and stabbed Autumn. Later in the interview, she told the police that she noticed and picked up the knife, which was on top of the washer or dryer near the rear bathroom, and then called Autumn into the bathroom and stabbed her. She subsequently described taking the knife from a kitchen drawer after Autumn admitted her to the residence. Maria repeatedly stated that she acted alone in killing Autumn and repeatedly denied that either of the men who came with her to the Wallace residence knew of her plans to burglarize the house. Maria told the police she decided to kill Autumn because the child could identify her as the perpetrator of the burglary. She explained that she took the knife into the bathroom with her and for several minutes considered killing Autumn. After calling Autumn into the bathroom, she removed some eyelash curlers from her makeup bag and asked Autumn to clean them for her. Autumn agreed to do so, and after she turned around, she began to stab her. Maria told the police she repeatedly stabbed Autumn in the back, chest, and head. She also told the police that she next removed the television set from April's room and a VCR from the living room and carried these items outside to the vehicle where Reynoso and the driver waited with Manny. Maria went back inside the house and took a typewriter, mirror, telephone, clock radio, clothing, and a pair of boots from April's bedroom. She removed a telephone, iron, lamp, radio, and Nintendo game from Linda Wallace's bedroom, and a clock and a calculator from the living room. Maria attempted to take a microwave oven, but later determined it was too large to fit inside the automobile. She took the knife she had used to stab Autumn with her when she departed from the Wallace residence. She was tried and convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances. At the end of the penalty phase of the trial, the jury deadlocked 10-2 on the sentence of death. The penalty phase of the trial was then declared a mistrial. A second jury returned a verdict of death. The trial judge upheld the jury's verdict and sentenced Alfaro to death. Maria was the first woman sentenced to death in the gas chamber and at the time of sentencing was the third woman on death row in California. In August 2007, the California Supreme Court voted unanimously to uphold her death sentence. Socorro Caro had violently attacked her husband and others on 8 occasions prior to the night of November 22, 1999, when she shot and killed 3 of her 4 sons. In these previous incidents, Ms. Caro had used weapons and the element of surprise to her advantage and had caused several injuries, including serious eye damage to her husband. Why didn't Dr. Caro, a respected San Fernando Valley doctor, leave her? Why didn't he tell anybody what was being done to him? I was ashamed. I was embarrassed, he testified during the penalty phase of Socorro Caro's trial. According to other reports, he was also skeptical that authorities would believe him. Prosecutors said Caro was seeking revenge against her husband for their failing marriage when she shot Xavier Jr., 11, Michael, 8, and Christopher, 5, in the head at point-blank range. A 4th son, 13-month-old Gabriel, was unharmed. Caro also tried to kill herself, but survived a gunshot wound to the head. She said the injury caused brain damage that prevented her from remembering what happened the night of the shootings. She murdered 3 kids, an 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. It was murder of the most callous type by a selfish and vindictive person, Deputy District Attorney Cheryl Temple said. Caro broke down while walking past her husband, Dr. Xavier Caro, who was seated in the courtroom gallery. "How could you do this to us? How could you do this to us?" she shouted at Caro, a prominent rheumatologist practicing in Northridge. "Look at him. He's smirking at me. He's smirking." The defense argued during Caro's 4-month trial that Xavier Caro actually killed his sons, then framed his wife for the crime. Prosecutors had said Socorro Caro, 44 at the time, was angry after a fight with her husband and methodically shot the boys with a handgun while they slept at their $1 million Santa Rosa Valley home. She then shot herself in the head but survived. Caro's defense originally contended that her husband killed her children, then shot and framed her. She had pleaded innocent to the murder charges, but later changed her plea to innocent by reason of insanity. Socorro Caro was sentenced to death on April 5, 2002. Celeste Simone Carrington lived in a tough part of Philadelphia. She was pregnant by age 14, carrying her own father's child. As a young adult, she moved to California, where she went to community college. She excelled at track and field and competed internationally in shot put. She began to head down the wrong track. Although never criminally charged, she was fired from her janitorial job for stealing checks. She kept a set of keys to buildings she had worked at. In 1991, Carrington became depressed and lost her job. She had been trying to financially support her lover and her lover's 3 children, and was no longer able to do so. She had no criminal history until she began her murder spree. After being fired, Carrington began stealing checks from companies she had access to and writing at least one out to a friend to cash. He was arrested. In Redwood City, California, on January 17, 1992, Carrington broke into a Dodge car dealership. She had worked in the building and knew the back entrance was often left unlocked. She wore gloves and used a crowbar to force open interior doors. She stole a .357 Magnum revolver and 5 bullets. The second incident involved the burglary of a building located at 1123 Industrial Road in San Carlos. She previously had worked on the premises as a janitor and had retained a key to the building. On the night of January 26, 1992, she borrowed a car from her neighbor and drove to the location, armed with the .357 Magnum revolver she had stolen from the Dodge dealership. She used her key to enter the building, accidentally setting off the alarm. Victor Esparza, who was cleaning the facility, observed her in an office cubicle. She told him that she worked in the building and must have accidentally set off the alarm. Esparza asked her to call the building manager to report the alarm, took out his wallet, and handed her a telephone number. She displayed the gun and took his wallet, which contained about $45 or $55 in cash. She also demanded the personal identification number for his ATM card, which he wrote down. As she walked out of the cubicle, she turned around and shot Esparza. She later attempted to use his ATM card, but the pen he had given her was invalid, admitting that she intended to kill Esparza and that the experience was exciting and made her feel powerful. Esparza died of a gunshot wound to the head, inflicted from a distance of approximately 6 inches. The third incident involved the burglary of an office building located at 777 California Street in Palo Alto in Santa Clara County and the murder of Carolyn Gleason on March 11, 1992. She previously had worked as a janitor in the building and had retained a key. A neighbor gave her a ride to the premises from her apartment in East Palo Alto. She brought a pair of gloves, a screwdriver, and the same .357 Magnum revolver she had used to kill Victor Esparza. Her key would not open the door. She observed 2 cars in the parking lot and 2 janitors working in the building. She waited for these individuals to leave before using the screwdriver to open the door. She walked through the facility looking for money but found none. She heard Caroline Gleason enter and go into an office. She watched her and eventually encountered her in the copy room. When Celeste displayed the gun, Gleason begged her to put it away. According to Celeste, she did not want to hurt Gleason, but she became nervous and pulled the trigger. After shooting Gleason, she took Gleason's keys and about $400 from her desk. She went outside to the parking lot and entered Gleason's car, where she found Gleason's purse, which contained her ATM card and pen. She drove the car to a bank in Palo Alto, where she made 2 unsuccessful attempts to withdraw money from Gleason's account, but was able to withdraw $200 from an ATM at a 7-Eleven store and another $100 from a second bank. She left the car in a hospital parking lot and took a taxi back to her apartment. An autopsy indicated that Gleason died as the result of a single gunshot to the head fired from a very close range. The fourth incident involved the burglary of a medical office building located at 80 Brewster Street in Redwood City and the attempted murder of Dr. Alan Marks on the evening of March 16, 1992. As in 2 of the earlier incidents, she brought with her a key she had retained from her prior employment at the building as a janitor, a pair of gloves, and the same .357 Magnum revolver. The doors to the building were still unlocked when she arrived at 5:30 p.m. After discovering that she was unable to open any of the internal offices with her key, she hid in a closet for a few hours. She emerged from the closet and spent some time in the building before observing Dr. Marks leaving his office after a late appointment. She decided to rob him and pulled out the gun. When Marks observed her, he went crazy, and the two struggled over the gun. During the struggle, she pulled the trigger 3 times, resulting in 1 misfire and 2 shots. Marks managed to force her out of the office and locked the door. Celeste fled the building, taking with her some access cards and prescription drugs. Dr. Marks testified to a somewhat different version of the shooting. According to his account, as he was about to leave his office, Celeste pushed the door open and came barreling through, causing the door to push him to the side. He recognized her as a former janitor in the building and began screaming and waving his hands. She was standing about 3 feet from him, holding a gun in her right hand. She pointed it at his upper body and he heard gunshots. He was shot in the left shoulder, left thumb, and right forearm. After being shot, Marks collapsed to his knees and Celeste left the office. He closed the door behind her and called 911. Celeste was arrested a few days later. Her apartment in East Palo Alto was searched pursuant to 3 warrants obtained by the Los Altos, Palo Alto, and Redwood City police departments. The police found evidence that connected Celeste to all 4 incidents: the keys to the Redwood City Dodge dealership, the gun that had been taken from the dealership, which was the weapon used to shoot Esparza, Gleason, and Marks, Gleason's pager and purse, and the key to the building in which she was shot, a box from Gleason's office that held petty cash, a piece of paper with Gleason's PIN on it, and a drug kit taken from a doctor's office in the medical building in which Marks was shot. On March 20, 1992, Carrington was arrested for 2 murders, an attempted murder and a number of burglaries. District Attorney James Fox told the media his office would seek the death penalty. He said it was the first time the county had ever sought the death penalty for a woman. The jury found Carrington guilty of 14 different charges on June 16, 1994. This includes the murders of Esparza and Gleason and the attempted murder of Marks. They deliberated for 1 day. Her crimes included some actions which were considered special circumstances. This includes murdering more than 1 person and premeditation. Legally, these circumstances made her eligible for the death penalty. On August 2nd, a jury recommended the death penalty. It took them only 2.5 hours. On November 23, 1994, the judge confirmed Carrington's death sentence. She became the first Northern California woman sentenced to death since 1941. She joined 5 other Southern California women on death row in Chowchilla Prison. Born in 1962, Cynthia Kaufman was the privileged daughter of a saint. Louis businessman, raised by her parents as a devout Catholic. She got pregnant at age 17, and she was forced into a loveless marriage, enduring 5 years of domestic captivity before she left home and fled west, traveling with little more than her car and the clothes on her back. She wound up in Page, Arizona, waiting tables in a diner, moving in with a local man after several weeks. In the fall of 1985, they were evicted from their small apartment after numerous complaints from neighbors of their drunken all-night parties. On May 8, 1986, Cynthia and her boyfriend were stopped for running a stop sign in Barstow, California. Police found a loaded Derringer and a quantity of methamphetamine in her purse, but she was released on her own recognizance. The charges subsequently dropped. Her lover wound up serving 6 weeks in the county jail, and it was during one of Cynthia's visits that she first met his cellmate, the man who would irrevocably change her life. James Gregory Marlowe was doing time for the theft of his sixth wife's car when Cynthia walked into his wasted life. Born in 1957, he had been a dedicated thief from age 10, committed to Folsom Prison in 1980 for a series of home invasions and knife-point robberies. Marlowe served 3 years on that conviction, earning himself a reputation as the Folsom Wolf, proudly wearing tattoos of the neo-Nazi Aryan Brotherhood. It was love at first sight for Cynthia and James, her boyfriend instantly forgotten when Marlowe hit the street, and they left California together in June. On July 26, 1986, Kaufman and Marlowe were linked to the burglary of a home in Whitley County, Kentucky, making off with cash, some jewelry, and a shotgun. Days later in Tennessee, they were married. Cynthia celebrated the occasion by having her buttocks tattooed with the legend, "I belong to the Folsom Wolf." That done, they drifted west again, in search of easy prey. On the evening of October 11, 1986, 32-year-old Sandra Neary left her home in Costa Mesa, California, to obtain some cash from the automatic teller machine at her bank. She never returned, though her car was found by police in a local parking lot. 2 weeks later, on October 24th, her strangled, decomposing corpse was found by hikers near Corona in Riverside County. Pamela Simmons, age 35, was the next to die, reported missing in Bullhead City, Arizona, on October 28th. Her car was found abandoned near police headquarters, detectives theorizing that she had been snatched while drawing money from a curbside ATM. 10 days later, on November 7th, 20-year-old Corinna Novus vanished on a similar errand in Redlands, California. The latest victim had been kidnapped from an urban shopping mall in broad daylight. Lynell Murray's boyfriend was worried on November 12th when the 19-year-old psychology student failed to keep a date after work. He found her car outside the dry cleaning shop where she worked in Orange County, California, but another day would pass before her naked, strangled body was discovered in a Huntington Beach motel room. In addition to kidnapping and murder, there was also evidence of sexual assault. Police were praying for a break, and when it came, the case unraveled swiftly. First, Corinna Novus's checkbook was found in a Laguna Niguel trash dumpster tucked inside a fast food takeout bag with papers bearing the names of Cynthia Kaufman and James Marlowe. Around the same time, Marlowe and Kaufman were linked to a San Bernardino motel room where the manager found stationery bearing practice signatures of Lynell Murray's name. A glance at Marlowe's criminal record did the rest, and a statewide alert was issued for both fugitives. On November 14, 1986, police were summoned to a mountain lodge at Big Bear City, California, where the proprietor identified his latest guests as Marlowe and Kaufman. A 100-man posse found the lodge empty, fanning out through the woods for a sweep that paid off around 3 p.m., when the suspects were found hiking along a mountain road. Kaufman and Marlowe surrendered without a fight, both wearing outfits stolen from the dry cleaning shop where Lynell Murray worked. Within hours, Cynthia led officers to a vineyard near Fontana, where they found Corinna Novus, sodomized and strangled, lying in a shallow grave. Marlowe and Kaufman were formally charged with that murder on November 17th, held over for trial without bond. If any further proof of guilt were needed, homicide investigators told press that fingerprints from both defendants had been found inside Corinna's car, and Kaufman had been linked to the Fontana pawn shop where the victim's typewriter was pawned. Another 32 months would pass before the killer couple went to trial, and in the meantime they experienced a falling out, each blaming the other for their plight. On one jailhouse visit, Cynthia's lawyer asked if there was anything she needed from the outside world. "Yeah," she told him, pointing to her backside. "You can find someone to help me lose this damn tattoo." The couple's murder trial finally opened in San Bernardino County on July 18, 1989. Both defendants were convicted across the board, and both were sentenced to death on August 30th. Cynthia Kaufman thus became the first woman sentenced to die in California since that state restored capital punishment under a new statute in 1977. Dalton was convicted of torturing and murdering Irene Louise in 1988 at a mobile home park in Live Oak Springs, California. She and 3 others, Mark Lee Tompkins, Cheryl Ann Baker, and another man known only by the name George, were alleged to have used various weapons to commit a torture murder: a cast-iron frying pan, a knife, and a syringe filled with battery acid. Dalton's sister, Victoria Thorpe, has spent years campaigning for Dalton's release, insisting she is innocent, that no body was ever found, and that the conviction was based solely on hearsay confessions provided to investigator Richard Cooksey. In 2019, Dalton's petition to the United States Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari was denied. DeLeon was convicted of the murder of Thomas and Jackie Hawks, a married couple, on November 15, 2004. Along with her ex-wife and 2 other men, DeLeon convinced the Hawks to test drive their yacht at sea. Far from the yacht harbor, she and her accomplices gagged and tied the couple to an anchor on the yacht and threw them overboard. The bodies of the Hawks have never been found. DeLeon was also accused of killing John Jarvie, a resident of Anaheim, California, who was found dead in Mexico in 2003. Skylar Preciosa DeLeon was born, convicted, and sentenced as John Julius Jacobson, Jr. DeLeon's gender was officially changed to female in 2019 while awaiting execution on death row. DeLeon was a child actor who appeared in commercials and in the series Mighty Morphin Power Rangers as an uncredited extra. At 20, DeLeon joined the United States Marine Corps, but deserted after 15 days, later given an other than honorable discharge. On October 26, 1999, Susan Eubanks of San Marcos, California, took the lives of her 4 sons. The boys, ranging in age from 4 to 14, were all shot in the head. She then turned the gun and shot herself in the stomach. According to her defense lawyers, she shot herself as a result of an attempted suicide. Only one other person was in the home at the time of the killings, Ms. Eubanks' 5-year-old nephew, who was found unharmed. After spending the day drinking with her boyfriend and taking Valium, they began to fight. Once home, she then slashed 2 tires on his car and refused to let him in the home. He called the police and they then escorted him to the home, where he removed some belongings and left. According to her defense team, this was the catalyst of the killings. They claimed that it was then that she lost control of her mind and body. After warning one of the boys' fathers as to her diminished mental state, the boyfriend told the father that she talked about killing herself and the boys. The father then called the police department. He asked the sheriff's department to check on the children. When the deputies arrived at the home, they heard sobbing, and inside found the 3 older boys dead from gunshot wounds to the head. The youngest was not yet dead, so an ambulance was called to the scene. The trial began in August of 1999, and the prosecuting attorneys alleged that Susan Eubanks had killed her sons as a result of rage. The rage was a result of anger felt toward their fathers and the boyfriend, whom had all chosen to leave her. It was claimed that she felt the desire to seek revenge for the failure of the relationships, that she had wanted the fathers to also know the pain of losing those that had been loved. In August of 1999, after just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. After 2 days, they returned with the sentence of death. The judge agreed with the sentence in October of 1999, and she was then transferred to the Central California's Women's Facility, where she now remains on death row. Along with her husband Ivan, Gonzalez was convicted of the 1995 scalding death of her 4-year-old niece, Genevieve Rojas. She was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture and mayhem. They are the first married couple in California on death row for the same crime. Genevieve was sent to live with Gonzalez in 1995 because her mother was in drug rehabilitation and her father was in jail for child molestation. Testimony from the trial detailed a long history of abuse, including being forced to live in a box, hung by her hands from a hook in a closet, and burned with a hairdryer. In 2012, Gonzalez's petition to the United States Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari was denied. Jessica Marie Hann, born Jason Michael Hann, was sentenced to death in 2014 for the murders of her daughter Montana and son Jason. In February of 2002, the badly decomposed remains of Montana were found in a Tupperware container after being abandoned in a storage facility in Arkansas 4 months earlier. Mann and her partner Chrissy Wernz had been living in a trailer at the time and kept Montana's remains underneath their bed. The two then rented a storage unit to store their trailer, which was then sold at auction after the rent went unpaid. The buyer of the unit then found Montana's remains while emptying the contents of the container. An autopsy of Montana found she had suffered fractures to her skull which had been caused by severe blunt force. Her left tibia had also been fractured, with the Arkansas medical examiner saying that it was caused by bending or twisting her leg as if you wanted to break a pencil. This discovery led police on a nationwide search for her parents and traced the license plate of the trailer to Hann. The two were found living at a hotel in Maine with a 1-month-old named Michael, with police arresting the two and taking the child. Michael was then placed into foster care and, according to court papers, was unhealthy at the time. He was later admitted to hospital, and it was discovered he had 13 rib fractures, as well as fractures in his legs, both knees, and one of his ankles. After a CT and MRI scan, doctors said Michael had also suffered a bleed to the brain, which was caused by violent shaking on more than one occasion. In April 2002, just a day after their arrest in Maine, Mojave County Sheriff's deputies searched a separate storage unit in Lake Havasu, Arizona. Inside, deputies discovered a storage compartment underneath a bench which contained the remains of Jason. Authorities found his body inside a black nylon bag, which was wrapped in 17 plastic trash bags that had been lined with air fresheners. An autopsy of the remains concluded that he had suffered a fractured rib that was consistent with him being grabbed and shaken. In February of 2006, Hann was sentenced to 27 to 30 years in prison for the case of her son's death, with his daughter's murder being tried separately. In 2013, she was then handed the death penalty for killing Montana and leaving her remains in the storage unit. At the time, Hann had said he never reported the deaths for fear he and Wernz were wanted for a fraud charge in the state of Tennessee. Wernz was sentenced to 15 years to life for the death of her daughter, but avoided any charges relating to the death of her son. During his trial, Wernz said she was under significant duress during their relationship and that Hann had threatened to murder her if she went to the police. Wernz was also being held at the California Women's Facility, but was granted a move after Hann was allowed into the population. Hann was said to be awaiting breast augmentation surgery after being taken off death row and transferred to Central California Women's Facility after she began to identify as a woman. Lorraine Allison Hunter from Moreno Valley, California, killed her husband Albert Thomas for financial gain and had been planning his murder for months. Albert was found shot to death in the sleeper section of his semi-truck on November 4, 2009. The truck was parked in a dirt lot off of a busy intersection in Moreno Valley. Hunter was prevented from collecting his life insurance, but prosecutors claim she was aware of more than $1 million available in policies under his name at the time of his death. Hunter was interviewed immediately after Thomas's death, but wasn't arrested until 2011. Initially, she claimed she didn't know of any life insurance policies, but investigators found that she'd spoken to the trucking company that employed her husband and learned of 2 policies totaling $225,000. Those policies, police found, would double if Thomas was murdered instead of dying from a natural cause or as a result of an accident. When deciding her sentence, the jury was shown evidence that another husband of hers was murdered in Inglewood in 1996. In that case, no one was ever charged, and she collected roughly $312,000 in life insurance. October 2011, Lorraine's niece, Shanice Hunter, was arrested for shoplifting. She then confessed to the police that she knew who killed Albert. Shanice told the authorities that sometime in the evening on November 3, 2009, she picked up Lorraine and Brianna from where Albert's truck was parked. This was around the time Albert was believed to be murdered. Soon, Lorraine and Brianna were arrested. While Lorraine refused to talk, Brianna, then 18 years old, cooperated with the authorities. She told the police that she helped her mother kill Albert. On that evening, the three of them were out on a walk when Albert went into the truck to search for a sweatshirt he picked up for Brianna. When the three were inside the vehicle, Lorraine shot Albert 4 times before Shanice picked them up. Brianna agreed to take a plea deal and testify at her mother's trial. She stated that the couple argued because Lorraine felt he didn't make enough money to sustain her lifestyle. On top of the $450,000 available through her husband's life insurance policy, Hunter forged his signature in an attempt to secure another more lucrative policy of $750,000 just 6 months before his murder. She was never able to collect any of the money because she never obtained a death certificate. In August 2017, 61-year-old Lorraine was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The jury also found true special circumstance allegations of lying in wait and killing for financial gain. She was sentenced to death. While in prison before her trial began, Lorraine also tried to place a hit out on Shanice to prevent her from testifying. Brianna pleaded guilty to 3 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of voluntary manslaughter. When she was asked in court why she went along with her mother's plan, she said, "I did what my mother told me to do. She said we needed to get rid of him. I felt hurt and confused. He was the only father figure I knew, but I never questioned her 'cause she was my mom and I was loyal to her first." Brianna was sentenced to 18 years and 4 months. Cherie Rhodes killed 4 people and injured 2 others in February 2014 inside the Cedarville Rancheria tribal office. At the time, Rhodes was about to be ousted as the tribal chairwoman and was under federal investigation over at least $50,000 in missing funds. The victims were her 30-year-old nephew Glenn Colonico, her 19-year-old niece Angel Penn, her 50-year-old brother Rurik Davis, and tribal administrator 47-year-old Sheila Russo. Sheila had uncovered misused funds in the tribal books, which in part led to Rhodes being evicted. The shooting began during the eviction hearing. When she ran out of ammunition, she grabbed a butcher knife from the office kitchen and stabbed 1 other person. The eviction hearing at the office was against her and her son when she began her attack. Police arrested Rhodes after she ran outside and took her into custody. Rhodes was ultimately convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder for shooting and stabbing 2 of her other nieces. She was sentenced to death in 2017. Valerie D. Martin, at the age of 35, orchestrated the murder of her boyfriend, 61-year-old William Whiteside, on March 28, 2003, in Lancaster, California. Alongside her 16-year-old son, a 14-year-old boy, and 27-year-old ex-convict Christopher Kenny, Martin attacked Whiteside, rendering him unconscious and placing him in the trunk of his car, which they later set ablaze. On March 26, 2010, she was sentenced to death for her role in the crime. McDermott was convicted of hiring an orderly at the hospital where she worked to kill her roommate, Stephen Matthew Eldridge. Prosecutors allege the motive was to collect mortgage insurance on a house they co-owned. In addition to having been repeatedly stabbed, Eldridge's penis was severed after he was killed. The orderly testified that this was done at McDermott's insistence in order to make it appear that the killing was a homosexual murder, because in theory the police would be unlikely to investigate it thoroughly. McDermott appealed the sentence on the basis that no African Americans served on her jury. It is illegal to strike jurors on the basis of race. Her appeal was denied. In 2003, McDermott's petition to the United States Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari was denied. Michelle Michaud and her boyfriend, James Anthony DeVeggio, were convicted of luring 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson into a specially rigged van where they sexually tortured and strangled her before dumping her body on a snowy embankment. In addition to the 2002 murder and rape of their victim, 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson, the couple had previously raped and abused 5 girls, including Michaud's 13-year-old daughter. She and other victims turned to the police, and during questioning for their crimes, Sampson's body was found. In trial, both Michaud and DiVeggio were found guilty, and they both received the death penalty. In 2018, Michaud's petition to the United States Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari was denied. Nelson was convicted in the stabbing deaths of fortune teller Ha Jade Smith and her daughter, Anita Vo. On April 21, 2005, Nelson and Philip Zamora went to Smith's home under the pretense of visiting and having Nelson's fortune told. Nelson formulated a plan to murder Smith and Vo in order to rob them. Using knives from the kitchen, Nelson stabbed and murdered Vo as Zamora stabbed and murdered Smith. They left Smith face down on the kitchen floor. Smith bled to death after being stabbed in the head, face, neck, shoulders, and hands. They left Vo on the floor of the laundry room with her head jutting out into the hallway that led to the kitchen. Vo bled to death due to multiple stab wounds to her head, face, and neck. After murdering the victims, the pair attempted to wash bloody kitchen knives and wrapping them in plastic bags. Nelson ransacked the victim's home with Zamora and stole personal items including cell phones, purses, jewelry, and credit cards. Nelson then drove with Zamora to Walmart to purchase paint. Returning to the victim's home and pouring white paint on Smith and Vo's heads and hands, Zamora covered Vo's face with a black shirt. On April 22, 2005, the same day the murderers arrived home in North Carolina, the Westminster Police Department received a call from a concerned friend who had not heard from Vo and asked that she be checked on. Police then went to the home and discovered the grisly scene. Nelson returned to Orange County in May 2005 for a South Coast Plaza shopping spree after purchasing plane tickets with the victim's credit cards. Westminster police detectives arrested her at the Santa Ana Holiday Inn on May 30th of that year. She had the victim's stolen credit cards, identification cards, and designer luggage in her possession at the time of her arrest. Zamora was arrested June 1, 2005, at his North Carolina home. Tanya Nelson was sentenced to death on April 23, 2010. Felipe Zamora pleaded guilty April 14 to 2 felony counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. Angelina Rodriguez was sentenced to death for the September 2000 murder of Jose Francisco "Frank" Rodriguez, her 4th husband. 3 years after Frank's death, Rodriguez's murder trial began in the fall of 2003. During the years since her arrest, prosecutors discovered that her 13-month-old daughter, Alicia, died suspiciously in 1993. Rodriguez claimed that her daughter choked on a pacifier that became dislodged, but investigators believe that Rodriguez removed the pacifier's nipple and used it to suffocate Alicia. Rodriguez then sued the pacifier manufacturer and was awarded a settlement of $700,000. After Alicia's death was ruled accidental, she also received a $50,000 life insurance policy. Although she never was charged with her daughter's death, this evidence was presented at her trial to show that Rodriguez's motive for the murder was financial. In October 2003, Rodriguez was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, murder for financial gain, and attempt to dissuade a witness. She was not convicted of the charge of soliciting murder. The following month, the jury rendered a verdict of death. Rodriguez was sentenced to death by lethal injection on January 12, 2004. Rodriguez was awarded a new sentencing hearing in 2010, but was resentenced to death in November 2010. Her most recent appeal was denied by the Supreme Court of California in February 2014. Rodriguez remains on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. Brooke Marie Rodiers of Corona was convicted June 23, 2010, of 2 counts of first-degree murder in the August 28, 2006 slayings of 22-year-old Marvin Gabriel and 28-year-old Milton Chavez. Rodiers led the day laborers to believe she would have sex for money and had them follow her and Franchune Daiwel Epps back to the National Inn in Corona, where Rodiers lived with Omar Tyree Hutchinson, a small-time drug dealer. Once inside the motel room, Epps pulled a gun and held it on the victims while Rodiers and Hutchinson stripped them and stole their money and valuables. Rodiers, who is 6 feet tall and weighs 200 pounds, beat the 5'2" Chavez, then bound him and Gabriel with electrical cords, phone cords, bras, and panties. Known as Crazy, Brooke gagged the men with anything she could get her hands on. They were hog-tied with cords around their necks to their hands, which were behind their backs and to their ankles. They asked for mercy. Instead of mercy, she let them suffocate to death while she and her co-defendants ingested drugs. Their bodies were wrapped in bedsheets and loaded into the trunk of a car that Rodiers drove to Gavilan Hills, a remote area near Lake Matthews, and abandoned on a dirt road. The car and the men's remains were found the next day by a resident, sentenced to death on October 22, 2010. Omar Tyree Hutchinson, 34, and Franchune Daiwel Epps, 26, were convicted by separate juries of the same charges. Epps and Hutchinson were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Kathy Lynn repeatedly abused and ultimately killed her 11-year-old nephew, Ricky Morales, leaving him to die alone in a closet on Christmas Day 2005. Her husband, Raul Ricardo Saranana, was also charged in the boy's death. They were convicted in March 2009 of first-degree murder and torture in Ricky's death, with the 2 separate juries. Raul Saranana kicked the child to death after the boy threw up a meal his aunt had made. Months earlier, Raul Saranana allegedly killed Ricky's 14-year-old brother, Conrad, in a Randall, Washington mobile home, where the Sarananas lived with their 2 small children and nephews prior to relocating to Corona. The Morales brothers went to live with Raul and Kathy after their mother was briefly jailed in an assault case in Los Angeles County, and their father was deported. Ricky and Conrad Morales were brothers that were born into a family and system that practically guaranteed that they never stood a chance. They were born to a drug-addicted mother who sold drugs to support her habit. Their young childhood was one that was filled with drug abusers, drug deals, violence, SWAT teams, child protective services, extreme physical abuse, and neglect. They and their siblings were in and out of protective custody by CPS constantly. Kathy Saranana was sentenced to death in Riverside County on June 26, 2009. Raul was sentenced to death on July 2, 2009. Michael Thornton and Janine Snyder were convicted of kidnapping, torturing, sexually abusing, and killing 16-year-old Michelle Curran on April 17, 2001. Michelle Curran was 16 when she was kidnapped from her Las Vegas neighborhood in late March 2001. 2 weeks later, her nude body was discovered inside a horse trailer in Rubidoux. She had been tied up, sexually assaulted, and shot in the head. She had been held captive during a 14-day period, given drugs, intimidated with firearms, and sexually exploited. 2 other teenage girls testified at the trial of how Snyder lured them to a hotel and Thornton raped them. Snyder also confessed to killing a 14-year-old girl who had been missing for over 5 years. Snyder was a friend of Thornton's daughter and moved in with him after having problems with her own family. Thornton's former wife testified to overhearing him discuss how he had killed a young girl and dismembered her body before throwing it in the ocean. Thornton and Snyder were sentenced to death on September 7, 2006 in Riverside County. A jury convicted Manling Williams of 3 counts of first-degree murder in 2010, along with the special allegations of using weapons and lying in wait. After one jury was unable to agree on whether to sentence her to death or life imprisonment, a second penalty phase jury recommended that she be put to death. She smothered her 2 young children with a pillow and slashed her husband to death with a sword in the family's Rowland Heights home in 2007. Pomona Superior Court Judge Robert Martinez handed down the sentence for the August 7, 2007 murders of her husband, Neil Williams, 27, and their sons Devin, 7, and Ian, 3, at the family's condominium in the 18,200 block of Camino Bello. The judge reflected on the crime at the sentencing hearing. "The evidence is compelling that the defendant, for selfish reasons, murdered her own 2 children," Martinez said. Her motivation was a narcissistic, selfish, and adolescent desire to start a new life with another man, free from the hindrances of family life. In the months before the murders, Manling Williams had reconnected through the internet with an old friend and began a relationship with him. The judge pointed out that Manling Williams had numerous family members who would have taken in the children should she have decided to abandon them. After smothering Devin and Ian in their bunk bed, the defendant savagely, brutally, and viciously attacked her husband with a katana sword, Martinez said. Neil Williams was stabbed and slashed more than 97 times in the attack, investigators said. In the final moments of life, Neil begged the defendant for help, the judge said. Manling was sentenced to death on January 18, 2012. Malachi Magana was the product of rape. His mother, Belinda Magana, treated him much different than his siblings. Malachi was subjected to unimaginable abuse before being scaled with boiling liquid and bludgeoned over the head. Belinda called Corona, California police and asked them to come to her apartment that she shared with her boyfriend of 5 months, Michael Nareen. Belinda said that her 2-year-old son, Malachi Magana, had disappeared while they were at a family barbecue at a park nearby. An extensive search for the toddler ensued, including volunteers on foot, bloodhounds, and a police helicopter. The search turned up no clues. When Belinda and Michael were questioned, police started to doubt their story and found inconsistencies and discrepancies. When Belinda called police, she sounded suspiciously calm. As the search was underway, neither Belinda or Michael exhibited signs of distress and didn't even participate in the search. In the early morning hours of the following day, the body of Malachi was found in rugged terrain just off Little Creek Road. Belinda had directed police there, telling them that Michael had killed him when she was out of the house. Malachi's body was riddled with bruises and burn marks. It was obvious that he had lived a traumatic and violent life. Both Belinda and Michael were charged with 1 count each of murder, torture, and assault on a child causing death. Prosecutors said that Malachi had been abused to death. Shortly before his death, either Belinda or Michael poured boiling hot liquid over Malachi. It scalded a layer of skin off his head, neck, and back. Neither adult decided to seek medical treatment for Malachi. Due to the burns, Malachi had cried out in pain, but when he cried, he was brutally beaten with a belt. 2 separate juries found Belinda Magana and Michael Nareen guilty of all charges. On May 2, 2015, both Belinda Magana and Michael Nareen were sentenced to death.